So we'll have to see how today's lesson goes. I'm without my assistant today because he's imprisoned in the room that is locked and nobody has a key for. So it's interesting. So my poor buddy Chalkboard is in prison right now. So yeah, well, Pritchard told me to leave it open because for some reason it's like auto-locking right now, and they can't find the key for it. So he's like, well, don't close it, otherwise you won't be able to get your stuff back in. Well, I get up here, and I can't get in the first place, so I can't get my poor Chalkboard out. So I know you're all disappointed. He's a family friend, and we'll just have to soldier on. So why don't you turn your Bibles to Genesis chapter 45. That's where we'll pick up. So we've been looking through life events of Joseph, and we're going to start to transition now from Joseph into the life of Moses. Yes, there's a lot of stuff that gets skipped into that, but that's the way it works. So last week we watched a video that also will help with our transition, as it covered both the arrival of Joseph into Egypt and then evidence for the Israelites actually living within Egypt. So as we look through the history for evidence of the biblical exodus and arrival of Israel into Egypt, we're looking for evidence of certain things, right? One is, did they arrive there? And yes, through Joseph we see that, and today we'll cover a bit of how the family of Israel gets down into there as well. Another thing we're looking for then is the multiplication of Israel in Egypt. Then, of course, obviously the slavery, which is what's most known, slavery of the Israelites in Egypt. Then the judgment of Egypt in the whole Exodus process, the actual Exodus itself, and then the conquest of the Promised Land. So that's kind of the whole big picture scheme of where these lessons are all going over the course of the next several months. That is not just today. No, that'd be a lot to pack into one day. I'm not that good anymore. I dwelled too long on rabbit trails, so it takes a little bit longer than that. So Genesis chapter 45, verses 7 through 11 is where we're going to start. Genesis 45, verses 7 through 11. The Bible says, "And God sent me," this is obviously Joseph speaking, "God sent me before you to preserve you a posterity in the earth, and to save your lives by a great deliverance. So now it was not you that sent me hither, but God. And he hath made me a father to Pharaoh, and lord of all his house, and a ruler throughout all the land of Egypt. Haste ye, and go up to my father, and say unto him, Thus saith thy son Joseph, God hath made me lord of all Egypt. Come down unto me, tarry not. And thou shalt dwell in the land of Goshen, and thou shalt be near unto me, thou and thy children, and thy children's children, and thy flocks, and thy herds, and all that thou hast. And there will I nourish thee, for yet there are 5 years of famine, lest thou and thy household and all that thou hast come to poverty." All right, so obviously we know Joseph is already in Egypt. This is then the summoning point of Joseph, where he's already revealed himself to his brothers, and he's like, look, it's me. Tell my dad to come on down, and there's going to be 5 more years of famine, so come on all down to me, and I'll take care of you. But there are 3 times in these verses where Joseph indicates who's in control of all these things. Who can tell me where those are? It's in the Bible right there. Verse 8 says, but God, right? What else? Right? Verse 7 says, God sent me. What happens in verse 9? God hath made me Lord of all Egypt. Right, God hath made me. So here, Joseph has learned throughout his enslavement with Potiphar and then being in the prison house for those years that he's got it now down to where God's in charge of all these things, right? When we see that even when he interpreted the dream before Pharaoh a couple weeks ago, where he said, well, I can't do it, but God will give Pharaoh an answer of peace, right? So here he's again indicating, look, brothers, I know you had evil intentions toward me, but ultimately God sent me, right? God hath put me in charge and has put me into this place of power and responsibility now. So here's what we're going to do. And he summons them in verse 10. It says, at the end of 9, come down unto me, tarry not, and thou shalt dwell in the land of Goshen. Now we know from our videos from last week that there's been a huge settlement in the land of the Goshen area, right? That was an Israelite settlement, right? So there's a lot of those things that are going on there that we can prove evidence-wise, archaeological evidence, right? That's a good word to say early in the morning. And then that backs up what we know the Bible says, okay? So that's what's happening there. In Genesis 45, verses 17 through 20, right? Now this is Pharaoh speaking. And Pharaoh said unto Joseph, say unto thy brethren, this do ye, lade your beasts and go, get you unto the land of Canaan, and take your father and your households, and come unto me, and I will give you the good of the land of Egypt. Ye shall eat of the fat of the land. Now thou art commanded, this do ye, take you wagons out of the land of Egypt for your little ones, and for your wives, and bring your father, and come. Also, regard not your stuff, for the good of all the land of Egypt is yours. Right? So what Joseph has told his brothers and his family, and what Pharaoh says to Joseph after Joseph reveals to Pharaoh that, look, this is my family, and this is what the situation is. And Pharaoh gives the same command that Joseph gave. Right? Okay, so now what is the family of Israel supposed to do? What does the Bible tell us they're supposed to do? In verse 18, 19, and 20. Where are they going? Goshen, right? They're going to the land of Goshen. Verse 18, come, right? What type of land are they given? The best, right? In verse 18, it talks about, where'd it go? The good of the land, and you shall eat of the fat of the land. This is even during the famine, right? They have, because of the waterways there and the proximity to the sea that's there, there is a green, lush area that's good for sheep that's there, for flocks, right? So the Lord is sustaining them even during famine, right? What happens during a famine? Who knows? Starvation. Starvation happens during a famine. Why? There's no food. Why not? There's no water. You got to be able to grow things, right? There's the way it works with crops and things is that it needs a certain amount of water. So when there's famine, there's no water. There's, drought, right? That's the cause of part of this. Other than that, it floods and everything and destroys everything. So those are your two options, right? But that's what's going on here. And even during this time, though, why aren't there Egyptians there? If it's the good and if it's the fat of the land, why aren't there Egyptians there? Or were there Egyptians there? They didn't raise animals, right? For some reason, they hated shepherds, right? That's an abomination unto them, right? And who knows? Maybe that still goes back to Abraham when he was down there. Who knows, right? But they are told to come. They're going to live in the good and in the fat of the land. In 19, it's reiterated again. Thou art commanded. Come, right? Look, here's wagons. There's no excuses for you to not come. We're going to give you the best of the land. We're even sending wagons out there so you don't have to carry all your stuff. Done, right? And in verse 20, The good of all the land of Egypt is yours. So now if we remember back to the video we saw last week, right? When the archaeologist, Dr. Bitek, right, was talking about what he discovered in the city of Avaris, right? What could he tell about that area? What could he tell about those people? Do we remember a week ago? They were shepherds, right? They were shepherds there, but what else? What did he tell you about the people who lived in that land? What kind of status did they have? Remember? Remember, he told you that they had like a free status, right? That they were either invited by the Egyptian crown or somehow blessed by the Egyptian crown. Remember that when he described the people that lived there? What do we see here in the Bible? What kind of status do they have? Exactly. They're being invited to come and live freely, right? Yeah, you don't even have to worry about your stuff. We'll take care of it all once you get here. Don't worry about it. We'll sort it all out. It's not a big deal, right? So the special status, the free zone that they lived in, being invited or blessed by the Egyptian crown, right? So Genesis 46, we see Genesis 46, verse 28. Genesis 46, verse 28. And he sent Judah before him unto Joseph. This is talking about Israel sending his son Judah unto Joseph to direct his face unto where? Unto Goshen, right? And they came into the land of Goshen. And then if you look at chapter 47, verse 1, then Joseph came and told Pharaoh and said, my father and my brethren and their flocks and their herds and all that they have are come out of the land of Canaan. And behold, they are in the land of Goshen. Right? So we have the Bible laying out how Joseph got there into Egypt. We have the Bible laying out how the family of Israel got into Egypt. We have Pharaoh commanding even, say, come, live of the fat of the land. And the whole time they're being directed to this land, this area of Goshen, where the evidence, physical evidence, shows that they were. Okay? What's interesting is then in Genesis 46, verses 1 through 4, this is now after the brothers go back to Jacob, telling their son's alive, and look, we're supposed to go to Goshen, right? And it picks up in verse 1 of chapter 46, and Israel took his journey with all that he had, and came to Beersheba, and offered sacrifices unto the God of his father Isaac. And God spake unto Israel in the visions of the night, and said, Jacob, Jacob. And he said, Here am I. And he said, I am God, the God of thy father. Fear not to go down into Egypt, for I will there make of thee a great nation. I will go down with thee into Egypt, and I will also surely bring thee up again. And Joseph shall put his hand upon thine eyes. Right? What do we see happening here in chapter 46, verses 1 through 4? Or does nobody see anything happening? Yeah, God is confirming what he's been told, right? Joseph told Jacob, Pharaoh told Joseph to tell Jacob, come on down. And what is God telling Jacob? Fear not, right? I'll protect you, I'll watch over you. Look, this is where you're supposed to be. Why should he know that's where he's supposed to be? Outside of where God's telling him to be. Where has he heard something like this before? What do we know about the family history? Probably jumping ahead a little bit. Acts chapter 7. Acts chapter 7. Acts chapter 7, Verse 17, but when the time of the promise drew nigh, which God had sworn to Abraham. Wait, what did God tell Abraham? Can we remember back that many months ago? What did God tell Abraham about what was going to happen to his descendants? Gotta be louder than that, Randy. Going to multiply like the stars, but then what was going to happen to them? They were going to become slaves, right? That there was going to be a nation that there was going to enslave them and inflict them for 400 or so years, right? Okay, so this is now the beginning of the fulfillment of that promise, right? So what has to happen, though, before the enslavement occurs? Right? There's got to be that multiplication. So Genesis 46. Go back to Genesis 46, verses 26 and 27. Genesis 46, verses 26 and 27. Say, and this is as Jacob and his family are coming into Egypt, right? And all the souls that came with Jacob into Egypt, which came out of his loins, besides Jacob's sons' wives, all the souls were 66. And the sons of Joseph, which were born him in Egypt, were 2 souls. All the souls of the house of Jacob, which came into Egypt, were 70. Right? So out of the land in Canaan, including Joseph and his family, how many Israelites do we now have dwelling in Egypt? 70. Right? We now have 70. In Exodus chapter 12. Exodus chapter 12. Exodus chapter 12, verse 40 says, now the sojourning of the children of Israel who dwelt in Egypt was 430 years. Okay? So we had 70 Israelites come down from the land of Canaan, and they're now in Egypt, and they were in Egypt how long? 430 years. That's how I'm interpreting all that mumbling. All right, very good. Numbers chapter 1. Numbers chapter 1, verse 45. Numbers chapter 1, verse 45 through 47. Numbers chapter 1, verses 45 through 47. So were all those that were numbered of the children of Israel by their house of their fathers from 20 years old and upward, all that were able to go forth to war in Israel. Even all they that were numbered were 600,000 and 3,550. But the Levites, after the tribe of their fathers, were not numbered among them. Okay, so this is after the Exodus, right? So they come down, Canaan, Egypt, there are now 70 people there. 430 years go by, Exodus happens, and we now have this many people leaving Egypt, right? This is in the wilderness now. So they have how many people after 430 years? Very good. 603,550. Now, this is just men 20 years old and upward, okay, that were fit for war. So you've got some old people, right, that are no longer fit for war, okay? You've got kids younger than 20, right? You also have women. And you also have the tribe of Levi, which wasn't counted at all. So easily, you're looking at 1.5 million. Piece of cake, 1.5 million. Some estimates have it all the way up to 3 million. Okay? Now, does that seem like a lot of people? Can you put 1.5 million into perspective at all? Ian, can you? Darlene says no, I don't know. I didn't check. 5 million, Chuck? Yeah. It's nuts, isn't it? We think of our modern structures and functionality that, how did they pull that off? Because you think 1.5 million people, that's about the size of the city of Dallas. Dallas is 1.4 million. San Diego, 1.46 million. San Antonio, 1.5 million. Philadelphia, almost 1.6 million. City of Phoenix, 1.7 million. City of Houston, 2.3 million. City of Chicago, 2.6 million. So there's the potential that the area, the number of people that were in that area rival Chicago. How nuts is that? And then you've got BTAC going, I don't know, there's no evidence that this is them. Really? Why are you choosing to ignore that so hardly, right? All right, very good. What's interesting then, okay, if you have the number of people that fit in like the area of Chicago and how big Chicago area is, the fact that the city that BTAC found, under the city of Ramses, you have the city of Avaris, right? And that whole area is covered with cities and sites that they've discovered around that same Israelite level that they haven't even dug into yet, okay? That they happened to find. They happened to find the city where Joseph was and his tomb. How big of a coincidence is that, right? Out of that whole area. So you're going to go to Chicago and go, let's see, Joseph's tomb is, boom, there. And just start digging. And what are your chances of finding that? Slim or none, right? That's needle in a haystack. What's the one where you chuck a silver dollar into a pile in Texas and you're supposed to find it? The odds of Christ's birth, I think it was, is similar to that. The odds of the birth of Christ being fulfilled in one man and all the details that went into that. It's like chucking a silver dollar into Texas and finding it. But that's what's going on here. Who's guiding and directing all these things? Randy? Right? Why would God direct this cat who has no interest in believing about what he finds to that exact location to find this exact evidence? Yeah. So remember when we talked about Romans chapter 1? I think it was us. I forget when we transitioned from the teen class. But Romans chapter 1, what happens in Romans chapter 1? What does God do in Romans chapter 1? Right? He gives them over to a reprobate mind. But what happens before that? Right? In verse 19, it starts off, because that which may be known of God is manifest in them. For God hath showed it unto them. For the invisible things of him from the creation of the world are clearly seen, being understood by the things which are made, even his eternal power and Godhead, so that they are without excuse. Because that when they knew God, right, when he reveals himself to them, in whatever manner that is, what happens? They glorified him not as God, neither were thankful, but became vain in their imaginations, and their foolish heart was darkened. Professing themselves to be wise, they became fools. Right? And we see evidence of that happening in that video. Right? God is revealing himself to this guy. Right? He's revealing himself to BTAC and all the evidence that he finds. Even David Roll, right? He's an agnostic. He doesn't believe in God either. But it's weird. He sees it. How could it not be them? Right? But yet, neither of them take it from the head and move it to the heart. Right? So even though they're wise, professing themselves to be wise, when we look at B-Tech, I don't know, when I think about B-Tech, I'm like, dude, how? Right? But what has the God of this world done to these people? He's blinded their eyes, right? And that's exactly what we're dealing with people in the world, right? You could pop out the best evidence there is. Look, here's Christ's cross. This is his blood on the cross, right? This is his tomb. There's the grave clothes. You could lay it all out. You could play the video of what happened in real time, right? And then go, I don't think so. Right? Because it's not on you, Randy.
But what is vain in their imagination?
Vain in their imaginations. So you have clear evidence that the evidence says one thing, right? Especially as a scientist, the evidence he's seeing says one thing, and he goes, no, it means something totally different. Right. It's vain. It's fake. Chuck.
I would love to own a Porsche Cayenne Cayman-S. That's a vain imagination. And that's the truth. I would love to own one. I know I would enjoy it. Do I need that?
You wouldn't be able to get out of it, Chuck.
Oh, yes, I could.
Really? I think you could get into it. I don't think you'd be able to get out.
Vain means common, venal. We're made in the image of God. Why were we going to, worship him with every breath?
Yep.
So when we get involved in, and God made us and made things for us to enjoy. Good food, have a nice home if he's going to give you that. And if he doesn't, you still enjoy what he's giving you. But that's not vain. That's walking with God. When we get vain, is all I want to think about is get a little better car or this or that. That's a vain imagination. You're not alive.
Yeah. Have you ever noticed, I don't know, especially guys, have you ever noticed how your head thinks you're one age and your body tells you you're a different age? Right? It's like there's a disconnect there in what your brain thinks your body can do. And then you pay the price for that. All right. Very good. So let's go back to Acts chapter 7 again. Acts chapter 7. So we see evidence then of, in the Bible, of the multiplication that happens to Israel in a short period of time. They're going from 7 to either 1.5 or maybe even 3 million people in just a short period of time there. And in Acts chapter 7, verses 17 through 20, this is where we touched on before. But when the time of the promise drew nigh, right? So this part of the promise that God gave to Abraham, this time is drawing nigh, which God had sworn to Abraham. The people grew and multiplied in Egypt from 70 to almost 3 million people, till another king arose, which knew not Joseph. The same dealt subtly with our kindred, and evil entreated our fathers, so that they cast out their young children, to the end that they might not live. And then in verse 20, it starts to introduce Moses, in which time Moses was born and was exceeding fair and nourished up in his father's house 3 months, right? And that's the direction that our story is going to be going in. In Exodus chapter 1, if we flip back there, Exodus chapter 1. We start to see these things coming to pass. Exodus chapter 1, verse 8. Now there arose up a new king over Egypt, which knew not Joseph. All right, so the question is, why not? Why didn't the king know Joseph? Randy?
We're going to have to my kind of
God didn't let him? Okay. Why didn't the new king know Joseph? Tony. Oh, it wasn't passed on from one generation to another. Why not? They became lax? Is that what you said? All right, let's flip that around for a second, right? We have us, and then we have a generation under us, right? Or even the generation before us. Who told you about Christ? Was it the generation before you? Right? In my case, it was my mom. So yes, it was my generation before me. Right? So she told me about Christ. But then what happens after that? We're supposed to, right? As we go through Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, what's supposed to happen? What does God say is supposed to happen in our families? Right. You're supposed to talk about it. You're supposed to pass that on. What good things did God do? Right? So what just happened in Egypt? God miraculously saves that country from destruction, like the area around them. But yet, that's in the past. Nobody cares about that. Nobody studies history, right? Nobody cares, right? These things, we get lax, as Tony said, right? Well, what happens with our kids? What happens with our kids, right? We get lax sometimes, don't we? And then that next generation, what happens to them? Okay, Chuck? Mm-hmm.
They're not very Bible centuries. It's rare to find a Catholic that actually regularly reads the Bible.
Mm-hmm.
And that makes a big difference. I'm just talking about when you read the histories and read the accounts with Moses, and you start to become aware and familiar with all the intimate details. You read the Gospels, four separate. You begin to know. This book's true.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not, even if you weren't saved, I think you come to, but if you don't, it's easy for Satan to get you down. Those are all fairy tales, to marginalize.
Sure.
And you're talking about accounts of history in Egypt after 400 years. Now, we're just talking the Egyptian people.
Yeah.
How could they forget that truth, right? What happened 400 years earlier?
Right?
Well, I mean, history's rewritten all the time. We have history written in this country. It's not really accurate.
It's funny how they were talking about in the video last week how the Egyptian timeline of history is so muddled that even they don't know their own history and where the pharaohs were, and because there was often times where pharaohs overlapped, or they were in like it was divisions or sections, or like you're down there and I'm up here kind of thing, right? So their whole history is so screwed up. Why? Why their history? Because who else is there? Right? That's where the Hebrew history is. If I can wipe out a whole people, right? Like how he mentioned in the video where he was like on the train or whatever he was doing. And it's like, if we can wipe out this, what does that mean? It means that the Christians got it wrong, the Jews got it wrong, Islam's got it wrong. It wipes out all the religions, just poof, like that. And now you got to question everything. All right? What else do we got? Let's see. But it's also how interesting and how quickly then we forget who saved us. Right? If we flip it around spiritually, how we're going to do Lord's table tonight, right? In remembrance of me. We even have to put it on the wood, in remembrance of me. Why do we have to be told that? Why do we forget? But why? Right? Satan's work, which is, okay, let's jump ahead before we run out of time, because if you look in Exodus chapter 1, verses 9 through 14, right? And he said unto his people, this is the new Pharaoh, which knew not Joseph, behold, the people of the children of Israel are more and mightier than we. Come on, let us deal wisely with them, lest they multiply, and it come to pass that when there falleth out any war, they join also unto our enemies and fight against us, and so get them up out of the land. And, said taskmasters and afflicted them, et cetera, right? And this goes back to then to the promise that God told Abraham back in Genesis 15, right? This is what's going to happen. This is your people are going to be afflicted, and they're going to come out eventually. So this is the working of that promise. So we know God is in control here. But as we go back into sin is such a strong pull for us, and why we have to put it in wood to remember the one who saved us, what's interesting about verse 9? The people of Israel, there's more of them than the Egyptians. They are stronger than the Egyptians. But they're the ones that are enslaved. Okay, so let's flip that around spiritually. Galatians chapter 5. Galatians chapter 5, verse 1. Ian, can you read that for me, please? Come on, man. It's right before Ephesians. I need a good Ian voice here.
Is that Galatians chapter 1?
Chapter 5, verse 1.
Stand fast, therefore, in the liberty wherewith Christ hath made us free, and be not entangled again with the yoke of bondage.
All right. So, Ian, you stay there, okay? Everybody else, turn to Romans chapter 6. We'll use Ian as our bookmark. Romans chapter 6, verse 16. Romans 6, verse 16 says, Know ye not that to whom ye yield yourselves servants to obey, his servants ye are to whom ye obey, whether of sin unto death or of obedience unto righteousness. Now, what's that Y word that's in there? Yield. What does that mean? Right. It's a submission, right? But what kind of submission? It's voluntary, right? You're driving along, you see a yield sign. What do you got to do? Take a quick glance and vroom, and you're gone, right? That's the way that works, because I was there first, right? It's a voluntary submission, okay? Ian, read Galatians 5:1 again.
Stand fast, therefore, in the liberty wherewith Christ hath made us free, and be not entangled again with the yoke of bondage.
All right, bondage, right? What do we have happening in Romans 6:16? What are they becoming when they yield? Servants. Servants are in bondage, right? Okay. 1 John chapter 4. Titus, 1 Peter, 1 John chapter 4. 1 John chapter 4, verse 4, right? 1 John 4:4. Ye are of God, little children, and have overcome them, because greater is he that is in you than he that is in the world. Right? So, where's our Galatians verse again? Bookmark?
Will you want me to turn back?
You were supposed to still be there. You're our bookmark, Ian. Right, what are we supposed to do? Stand fast. What does that mean? Don't move. Don't retreat. Don't give up ground. Do not surrender. Do not yield. Right? Where's our verse? Come on, bookmark.
Stand fast, therefore, in the liberty wherewith Christ hath made us free, and be not entangled again with the yoke of bondage.
Right? Don't be entangled. Stand fast. Do not yield. Do not surrender. Do not give up ground. Randy. What? Fight till you're dead. Right? Very good. Why? Why can we do that? Why should we do that? 1 John 4:4 tells us, because nothing. Because. Right. Go back to Israel. Who's stronger, Israel or Egypt? Who's got more people, Israel or Egypt? Who's stronger? Who's in us or who's in the world? But why don't we remember? We don't remember. We have to we do this every month. Why? How dumb are we? Right? Who here has forgotten their birthday? Okay, so we're not that dumb, but yet we can't remember the one who saved us. What is wrong with that picture? Chuck.
Talking God, we can talk spiritually.
Yeah?
It's most easily applied to that way. But the children of Israel, they were in a political situation. There's a physical dynamic. They live in a certain area near Egypt, right?
Yeah.
And political power is being imposed over them. It still applies, and I totally agree that it applies. They didn't need to yield.
Sure. They're in their own land.
But among Christians, this is my opinion, but I'm kind of rebellious.
Duly noted.
Oh,
Chuck
yeah.
is rebellious.
I mean, we pull out Romans 13 all the time. Be subject to the authorities.
Sure.
And
Who is your authority,
Jesus,
Chuck?
Jesus was dealing with that, right?
Yeah.
You know, whose picture's on the coin?
Yeah. Yeah.
At the same time, I mean, there's application for us. There's things that have happened in this country that aren't right. They aren't constitutional. And I don't mean just the surface things that we've been seeing in the last few years.
Yeah.
But I'm a Christian in a church. Some of the things I believe in would say might not be really desired to be around here because we follow Romans 13.
Yeah.
And so I just say that those kind of subtle things can happen, and 100 years goes by, and all of a sudden you're slaves.
Sure. But if you look at the example of Christ, right, you've got the question that comes up to him, when do you give taxes or not? And whose nonsense is this? And flips it off, right? I like to envision that. I think he takes it and he goes, fling. He goes, you can give it to Caesar, right? But then whose will is he following? Right? If you look at the life of Christ, and over and over and over and over and over again, he says he is doing whose will? The Father's will. Right? Yes, there are things that do not matter. Right? As far as us, our Christian life, and whatever stupid rules they want to impose. Right? There are things that do not matter. But ultimately, whose will, like Christ, who's in us, whose will are we following?
We ought to follow God.
Right?
Our citizenship's in heaven. We're looking for a better country.
Right?
However, we live in a country that rules under law. And I sometimes actually feel like I'm doing wrong by paying my taxes in this country. Because you should render unto Caesar's what is Caesar's.
Caesar didn't give me nothing.
Also, if we were run by criminals,
Yeah.
that's a fact too. And they really have been put in power. And God has allowed that.
Yeah?
Nebuchadnezzar's in power.
Nebuchadnezzar's in power. But yet, what did Daniel do?
He did everything what God didn't want.
Right? Nebuchadnezzar's in power. What did Daniel do? Right? Not defile himself. Darius is in power. What did Daniel do? Is that, who was he then? Who was Daniel? Nebuchadnezzar's kid, whatever his name was, Bel something. Yeah, he was in power, handwriting on the wall guy, right? He was in power. What did Daniel do? Cyrus is in power. What did Daniel do? Right? Joseph, the example of Joseph and the example of Daniel are two very, they're very deep examples as far as to the governments, especially like Daniel, the governments that he survived. When somebody conquers a country, they don't leave the leadership in place. But somehow Daniel is prominent in power for 4 kings. Not transition kings, father, son, son, son. No, conquering kings, right? Joseph rises to power. A prisoner rises to power within the prison, right? And the guard doesn't even care, doesn't even check on anything he's doing, right? He goes from prison to second in command and nobody says anything. It's like, yeah, this guy's wise, right? Who is in us? But what is going to happen, as we see with Israel, is there's going to be affliction. Right? We saw it in Joseph. Joseph's doing what's right. What happened in his life? Smooth sailing the whole time. No, there's affliction. Daniel rises in power. What happens? There's affliction. Our lives, taxes, nonsense, stupid rules, whatever, affliction. Why? Because if they hated Christ, they're going to hate you. But we walk away from the power and we submit and we yield and we cough up control and we go, yeah, I'm a slave. We're greater because of who's in us. But we don't remember that. And with that, we have to end our epic adventure through God's Word today. Y'all are dismissed.